Welcome back to day 2 of the NGAA Research Symposium. I hope you all were able to have a stretch and grab something to eat and drink. So we're now going to move on to the second session of today. And to start with, I'll just recap from last week actually. So last week on day 1, we heard from our keynote speaker, Glenn Capuano of ID, Informed Decisions. And Glenn gave a comprehensive presentation on the changes we are seeing in growth areas as a result of the pandemic. And Kim's presentation also alluded to some of those demographic changes that are occurring. Glenn concluded that the intensity of growth in growth areas in the next few years will vary in different states. And this is because the way the pandemic has impacted across Australia has also been varied. In some states, growth will slow, while in other states, growth is likely to continue as it was pre-pandemic. So in summary, while the pandemic may impact the rate of growth in some states, growth areas in all states can still expect growth. Think about that. But it brings us to our next session, which is supporting economic and housing security in our growth areas. So we know that housing will continue to be built in growth areas. People still want to move to our areas, but the development model of growth areas does not always facilitate diverse housing and diverse jobs. These communities are immature in their development years, so many people find it difficult to secure appropriate housing and/or employment. And we've spoken a bit about the employment challenges. We're now going to hear about some research in some of Melbourne's growth areas to better understand the barriers to delivery of social and affordable housing. We will then hear from the City of Kwinana in Western Australia on initiatives that are being put in place to support home-based businesses. And following on from the 2 presentations, we'll have a panel session again, and this time we'll be joined by Geordie Meeks, who's a Life Course Centre Research Fellow. So let's start with our first presentation of this session. This presentation is titled Delivering Social and Affordable Housing in Growth Areas, and it's a joint project between the City of Whittlesea, Hume City Council and the Mitchell Shire. For those who are not familiar with their location, these 3 councils are all to the north of Melbourne, and between them they cover a massive area of Melbourne's future growth. It would also seem there's an incredible collaboration between these councils, because we heard on day 1 from them on research that the 3 councils have jointly undertook to understand how to better consider community resilience within the planning system. So again, I encourage you all to make the most of the platform and have a look at some of those presentations from last week. Today's presentation is by Joanna Stubbings and Kristine Mueller. Joanna's position is Social Planning and Policy Officer at the City of Whittlesea, and Kristine is Social Planning Officer at Hume City Council. Unfortunately, Joanna can't join us this afternoon, so the presentation has been pre-recorded. We also have Rebecca Siriani involved in this project. Rebecca is the Coordinator Advocacy, Social Policy and Partnerships at Mitchell Shire Council, and she will join us on the panel. Please look at their bios and connect with them on LinkedIn. I'm sure many of you are dealing with the same issue and will appreciate the complex nature that sits behind housing and what this research project is trying to understand. So we'll now run the presentation.
Thanks, Bron, and thanks for having us. Our 3 councils are in the Northern Growth Corridor in and around metropolitan Melbourne, as you can see from the slide here. And we formed a partnership to address the shared problem of a growing lack of social and affordable housing in our municipalities. So what did we do? In 2018, the Victorian government provided $2 million in grant funding to local governments for the purpose of increasing investment in social and affordable housing with a focus on social housing. So we formed a partnership project between Hume, Mitchell and Whittlesea with the aim of better understanding the demand and supply of social and affordable housing to strengthen our council's awareness of the planning and policy levers available to deliver more social housing. It was also to explore feasibility of delivering social and affordable housing at specific sites. So we looked at 4 different sites across our 3 LGA areas. We chose sites that we could all learn from. We looked at state government land, private land and council-owned land, with the option of looking at social and affordable housing above a community activity centre by air rights. And we chose those different scenarios so that we could all learn from them across our councils. And then finally, it was to begin to develop a collective regional framework for increasing the supply of social and affordable housing. We had some shared problems. We have some shared problems. So despite the popular belief that growth areas are affordable and can therefore attract increased levels of social and affordable housing, this project highlighted that it's just not the case. The 3 councils were experiencing ever-decreasing proportion of social and affordable housing, and some significantly so. For example, for Mitchellshire between 2011 and 2016, they actually had a decreased proportion in social housing from 3.2% to 2%, which is very low. The national average is above 4%. All of us had constraints in the growth of social and affordable housing, including being less attractive to development due to lower profit margins, lower house densities and therefore lower housing yields for sale, and less access to services and support for new residents. And in terms of that third point there, the opportunity for social and affordable housing and new precinct structure plans, site strategic development sites and rezoning applications, even though the Victorian Planning and Environment Act was changed to enable local governments to lever social and affordable housing outcomes, the opportunities still had to be case by case, and they were voluntary, not mandatory. And housing providers also told us that they had a preference for 20 or more dwellings for management purposes, although some did say that smaller amounts were still viable. The takeaway there was to have conversations with housing providers early to find out what is viable in our areas. We had shared opportunities. So as I mentioned, the Planning and Environment Act was changed to include affordable housing, which enabled local governments to negotiate affordable housing through voluntary agreements with developers. And this project galvanised the 3 growth councils to continue to work together to improve social and affordable housing outcomes. And one way was to develop a regional affordable housing framework. We're still working together on collective points of advocacy, as well as planning across our municipal boundaries to achieve better social and affordable housing outcomes within common developments. We now have an annual regional affordable housing action plan, which we're using to guide our partnership. But I'll pass on to Chris now from Hume City Council, who will take you through the key takeaways for growth areas. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jo. What were the main takeaways? What were the learnings that we found out between us with regards to this project? One of the aspects was that we actually need to change the narrative with regards to growth areas. We now know that living in growth areas is not as affordable as it appears due to the high service and transportation costs that residents face. In addition, housing needs are ever changing in our growth areas, and we need to be responsive, and developers need to be responsive to the ever-changing needs, be it culturally, whole of life cycle, or even the types and diversity of housing that we actually have in our growth areas. We've also learned that there's no one size fit all, and that their approaches in order to lever social and affordable housing needs to be on a case-by-case basis, as Jo has already mentioned, as well as we need to be having appropriate levels of planning skills and resources in order to negotiate those outcomes. Another takeaway was that we learned that our shared issues and collective voices between the growth councils can actually send a very strong message to state government for the need for better planning tools in order to deliver social and affordable housing outcomes. It was also learned from this project that it was also important to actually look at housing infrastructure from its other side. We also need enhanced and increased levels of support services in our growth areas to actually support residents that are there. So it's not just bricks and mortars we must be concerned about with regards to affordable and social housing, but also the support networks that are there for our communities to build resilient communities as well. It was also important for us to learn that this is a start of a journey, and it's a start of a conversation and many learnings between us as three councils. And this is also one of the reasons why we're here today, so that us as growth councils can learn from one another to actually have a better understanding what can practically be done on the ground, as the next slide suggests. Thanks, Joe. A common message that we learned from this project is that collectively, together, we need to do better. And through these very strong partnerships, we can actually help to underpin a collective vision into the future for improved growth areas, outcomes for our communities, with support and assistance to ensure diverse, vibrant, inclusive, and resilient communities. We would love to hear from you about your experiences, and thank you for listening to us today about our experience, and hopefully collectively we can across Australia do better for our growth areas and with our communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna and Kristine, for that insight. I understand Kristine's actually able to join us. She's online as a participant now, so thank you for that presentation. I think one of the interesting observations I make from the research is really it's easy to assume that because our growth areas are relatively affordable, that means anyone can access housing, and that is certainly not the case. And also the importance of the diversity of social housing in these areas, where there are very different sectors of the community who don't need a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom house on a large block. So thank you again for that presentation.